Hey guys, back with another video on one of our ancestors. But at the outset of the video today, I'm going to recommend, if you guys would like to, as Uncle Ron has done, to subscribe to my channel. The only reason I use this is obviously for these videos. So if you subscribe, you'll get notified when a new video comes out. I'll still post them in the GroupMe chat. And if anybody wants me to send them to them, I can. But if you subscribe, you'll see them when you log into YouTube or when you pull up the app. You could, of course, turn on notifications. I don't want to go through the whole spiel like I'm some YouTube personality person, because I'm not. But just for you guys, so you don't have to find out where they are every time, you can just subscribe. That works. So today's video is about Paul Richard Weidner. He is the youngest sibling of Mary Alice Weidner, who is Earl's wife. So my great-grandmother, one of, the cousin's great-grandmothers, and in the case of the Hartman kids, your grandmother. She was the second youngest of from what I can tell, 7 children from Solomon Weidner and Sidney Fitzgerald. So those would have been Grandpa Hartman's grandparents. She was the second youngest, born in 1890. He was the youngest, born in 1893. And as I was building out her family, come across the names of the kids in the census and add them in. He was one that stood out because he died at a pretty young age, at 30. And there wasn't anything else on him. Never married, no kids, not a whole lot of information. So as I looked into it, I came across a census that had some interesting information that helped me dig a little bit. First, I'll just read the life story information from his page, because it sets it up in a pretty interesting way to begin with. When Paul Richard Weidner was born on June 29th, 1893, his father Solomon was 67 and his mother Sidney was 40. So you can see, and I think mentioned that in a video prior, or certainly told people who in the family who I've been around for some of these trips, but Solomon was significantly older than Sidney, his wife. I think he was, by this math here, 27 years older. And they had to have married within a time where she could still have children, so and started fairly young. So when Paul was born, his dad is 67, and just by the average lifespan, he's not going to be around for much of Paul's life. And I don't think he was. I believe Solomon died within the next 5 to 7 years, if I remember correctly. So that's the family he's born into, the youngest of 7, and his parents are this old. I mean, they're certainly done having kids at this point, or close to it. So the census from 1920, when he would have been 27, the first census I see where he's not just listed as a child, was interesting. He didn't live with the rest of the family, and it says Paul R. Weidner, lists everything else about him, but his relation in this case, he's listed along a long line of people. And there's the head, as they often list it, the wife, 2 kids, and then they have people listed as servant, janitor, boarder. But then Paul is in a long line of people listed as pauper. At the time, that would have denoted that he was homeless, and certainly didn't have any real income of his own. So when I scrolled over to the industry and occupation, it said he was if I'm looking at here, an inmate in the almshouse. And I didn't know what the almshouse was. I mean, I knew generally what the term would have meant, that it would have been a poorhouse of some kind, but I didn't know the particulars in this case. But inmate, that's not a great term. Typically, inmates are just in correctional facilities or prisons or county jails or something. So I did some digging on this, and the Adams County Historical Society, as I've mentioned in a lot of other videos, a lot of really helpful resources. They did a whole video on the Adams County Almshouse. So that's where Paul was. He was at the Adams County Almshouse, or the poorhouse, they called it. It's actually not far at all from where the new Historical Society building is going to be. It is just north of Gettysburg, and the building is not there anymore. The grounds were demolished, and I think the whole enterprise was given up in, I think, the 60s. It lasted, I'm not sure the total lifespan of the building or the almshouse, but it's not there anymore and hasn't been for a long time. But on the Adams County website, the Historical Society's website, I found it's the records of the almshouse of Adams County. and it's a alphabetical register of the people who stayed there or were admitted. So I found Paul Richard Weidner. It says, and remember, he's born in 1893, dies in 1920, or I'm sorry, 1923. But he was admitted April 20th, 1916. He does not have a discharge date because he died while living there. He was born 1893 in Floridale, which is where Mary was born as well, as we know. He died April 7th. It says his occupation was a laborer. And then what was interesting are the comments and who he was admitted by. So he was admitted by Sidney Weidner, his mother. And the comments on him are a couple abbreviations that I don't understand, but some of them say, the last two say deaf and D. And from what I can tell in this, I mean, deaf, we know what deaf means. He wasn't able to hear. And D, I'm just from other clues here, would mean dumb. So it seems that he wasn't able to speak or hear. I'm not sure. It seems like if he was, I'm assuming he was born with these disabilities. I don't know if there was other mental disability attached to that or if it was just those two. But either way, at that time, certainly before the modern age, over the last 60 to 80 years, that would have been a pretty debilitating thing to be born with. So a really sad story. He's the youngest, his parents are older, and his father by this time, when he was admitted in 1916, is dead, and dead for a number of years. And so Sidney, who the other children, some of whom are married, has to admit him to this house because she just can't take care of him. And I assume, at this point, I know that Sidney was living with one of her children and that daughter's husband, George Myers, on a street not too far from where Floridale is now, actually right by where Floridale is now. And that farm, I guess there wasn't anything he could do there. I'm not sure what kind of condition he was in because a lot of the people in the almshouse it was a kind of a catch-all for the poor, for invalids, for disabled people, and also for insane people. And some of those people were dangerous to themselves and others. And there's some people recorded in the almshouse records as insane and then others as very insane. And there were stories from people who would go and inspect the living conditions and talk about how horrible they were there and how some people were literally chained up to the wall or to a giant ball and chain because if they were off of it, they were clinically insane and it was unknown what they might do. Some horrible stories from there. So I'm sure this was not a place you'd want to be. I'm sure, too, some people had a fine enough time, and the people there, I'm hoping and assuming, some of the people who worked there did good work and wanted to, but you don't want to be living in the almshouse. It's not a good sign. It means you either don't have any family or the family you do have can't take care of you because of the state you're in. So that was where Paul was admitted to in 1916. And then pulling up the article in the Gettysburg Times about his death, it says, dies of measles. Paul R. Weidner, 29, was inmate of county home since 1916. Private funeral services were held at Bendersville Sunday afternoon for Paul R. Weidner, an inmate of the Adams County home, who died there Saturday after a short illness of measles complicated by pneumonia. He was 29 years old and had been at the county home since 1916. The deceased is survived by his mother, Miss Sidney Weidner of Quaker Valley. It's called Quaker Valley, but there's a Quaker Valley Road now there. And two sisters, Mrs. E.P. Hartman, that's ours, Mrs. Earl Pennington Hartman, of Bendersville, and another living in Chicago. So of all of that, he's the youngest of 7. There's only 2 of them left after he dies. I don't think I've talked about it, and maybe I have in a video, but the Weidner family was just decimated. I mean, Solomon is older, so he dies when the children are fairly young. I don't recall off the top of my head how long Sidney lived, but she outlived a lot of her kids and certainly her husband. I think she died a few years before Mary died. But my goodness, there's not a lot of long life in the Weidner family other than Solomon, who lived to I guess in a slightly above average age. But Paul dies from measles, and then I guess the the immediate cause was pneumonia. And you can look up how people die from pneumonia. It's not super pleasant. But yeah, a sad story about Paul. But yeah, that was one that I came across, and the history of the almshouse was really interesting. I'm looking at his death certificate now, and it says bronchial pneumonia. If that's any kind of specification within pneumonia, I mean, pneumonia is pneumonia to me. And I'm assuming if you've got something else like measles, it's not good to have another illness there, in which case, I guess, and now, after COVID, we know the term a bit more fluently, but I guess that would have been a comorbidity, his measles and pneumonia. So that's the story of Paul. I don't know too much else about the Weidners, and obviously Mary Weidner died so young that our grandfather doesn't even remember her very much. So there's not a ton to find. As I've said in other videos, the search for primary source document continues. If anybody knows people who might have letters or diaries or anything at all, please let me know. There is another video that I posted about the anniversary of the Indian raid in Lehigh County, where John Jacob Mickley's family had a few children killed, and you guys can check that out. And the next video is going to be a little bit more lighthearted. We're going to go over some ads from old Adams County papers from the 1800s and the early 1900s, and just enjoy those things. So thanks for watching, guys. Remember, you can subscribe if you want to get notified. You can turn on notifications if you really want to get notified when I put out more videos. These aren't too frequent, but if you want to do that, have at it. Have a great day.